The Jesus Bomb.
One fish, two fish, red fish, blue fish. Jesus on a cross, Jonah on a boat. Jesus couldn't linger, Jonah couldn't float. 3 days, 3 nights, so the story goes. From the deepest depths of darkness they rose. Hello, friends. Part 1, we tested the Easter doctrine, placing crucifixion on Good Friday, and we tested custody theory. Both failed because of contradictions. Part 2 was the Wednesday doctrine, with crucifixion on Wednesday. It also failed because of contradictions. Now it's time for Part 3. I'm calling it the Jesus Bomb. I had a different name planned, but this one had a lot of good stuff. So here's the chart. This time we're putting the crucifixion on a Thursday. But before we test it, you have to know this time the days start at sunrise. If you find contradictions or have questions, please leave them in the comments below. So let's check this out. Passover is always on the 14th day, and it's kept on the 14th day, not the 15th day. Numbers 9:5 says they kept the Passover on the 14th day. Boom! Once we've made Thursday the 14th, now we can number the days around it. Passover starts at evening with the killing of the lamb. This is where Jesus died, just before or at evening. Then notice, Matthew 25:57 says, evening had come. Evening had already come when they asked permission to take Jesus down from the cross. Listen, Jesus died on the 14th day, but he's not taken down from the cross until after sunset, and it's still the 14th day. They spent most of that evening during Passover washing and wrapping the body because they have to have him in the tomb before sunrise when the high Sabbath starts. So the disciples who were taking care of the dead body of Jesus are unable to keep the Passover because while everyone else is eating Passover, they are preparing the body of Jesus for burial. This is where it gets interesting. Written in the law, Numbers 9:10, it says, if anyone cannot keep the Passover by reason of a dead body, yet he shall keep the Passover unto the Lord on the 14th day of the second month. This is the only feast that has a provision like this. Why? Because it's the only feast that Jesus would die on. His disciples, without a doubt, kept the Passover the following month. This is proof of the ongoing validity of feast day Sabbaths in the new covenant. So this is where the burial is. It's close to sunrise before the tomb is closed. This matches Exodus 12:10 and Deuteronomy 21:23 perfectly. One says Jesus cannot remain all night. The other says he cannot remain until morning. His disciples seen how his body was laid. This is found in Luke 23:55. And they beheld the sepulchre and how his body was laid, and they returned and prepared spices and ointments and rested the Sabbath day according to the commandment. This proves they had the spices before the high Sabbath. It also proves the disciples kept both weekday and feast day Sabbaths after the death of Jesus by commandment. The old covenant was gone, and the earliest of the new covenant believers, truly apostolic, are keeping the Sabbaths by commandment. They are the most reliable source because they walked in the light. They're not removed by generations, and they kept the Sabbath days by commandment. And some say the Sabbath keeping isn't reliterated in the New Testament. So let's count the 3 days and the 3 nights. Put a 1 on Thursday. It's the first night in the tomb. It's a preparation because Friday is a high Sabbath, and Friday gets a 1 too because it's the first day in the tomb and the second night. Saturday is the weekly Sabbath, and it's the second day and the third night in the tomb. Notice that the whole premise for 3 days and 3 nights are these 2 consecutive Sabbaths, a double Sabbath in the year of his crucifixion. God is a God of reason. The Sabbaths are days of rest, right? Jesus is keeping the Sabbaths after his death, waiting for the Sabbaths to end. So when Sunday comes along, the first day of the week, Jesus arose from the dead, and on the 3rd day of his atonement, he didn't delay. No missing time here. At the crack of dawn, he rose. There's no gap. The Passover, unleavened bread, and first fruits are 3 parts of this one feast. And this is actually the celebration. This feast was always the celebration of the death, burial, resurrection, and the removal of sin by what Jesus did on the cross. Howbeit, they didn't recognize the symbology under the old covenant. Passover commemorates the death and burial. First fruits commemorates the resurrection. And the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the removal of sin. God said in Exodus 12:14, "You shall keep it a feast by an ordinance forever. Some might question how the feast of Passover is a 7-day celebration, when the Bible says it starts on the 14th and ends on the 21st. That's 8 days, not 7. What's the catch? The Passover starts in the evening, not during the day. It's a night of preparation, therefore not counted as one of the days of the feast. That's how the 14th is included in the feast without being counted as a day of the feast. Resurrection Sunday was on the 17th day of the first month in the year of his crucifixion. Incidentally, so was first fruits. Usually, it's after the high Sabbath. Unless the high day is Friday, then move it over. The Sabbath took over. If the 16th Shabbat, first fruits is not. 1 Corinthians 5:8, let us keep the feast. Wait a minute, what feast? Unleavened bread, also known as Passover? And who's telling us to keep the feast? Paul of Tarsus. The Passover sacrifice wasn't made for God. It was made by God for all those who would eat of it. Some people think the Last Supper was the Passover. No, it was a meal they ate when preparing for Passover. Okay, let's number the 6 days before Passover. This comes from John 12:1. It says, Jesus, 6 days before the Passover, came to Bethany. We include the 14th day in this count because Passover starts at evening. So the 14th day is the first day before the Passover. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We end up on the 9th. And look, Selection Day is on the 10th. Palm Sunday. Perfect. And we didn't have to move the Passover to the 15th to make it fit. I heard it said that Lazarus was a type of Christ, but I couldn't understand how until I seen this timeline. You can see Jesus died on the 14th day, and he rose on the 17th day. Count it. 14, 15, 16, 17. 4 days. That means he was actually dead 4 days, just like Lazarus, howbeit only in the tomb for 3 days and 3 nights. Pretty amazing. This timeline shows that he rose on the 3rd day, so that fits. He rose in 3 days, so that fits. And because he died on the 14th and rose on the 17th, he rose after 3 days. This fits where all other doctrines fail. And look, there's no delay between resurrection and the first witness. Doesn't that make more sense? As soon as Sabbath ends, he rose, and immediately he is seen by Mary. Don't touch me, he said, for I am not yet ascended. The other models have no explanation for the gap they create. Jesus rose early the first day of the week. His resurrection is at the very beginning of the first day of the week. Luke 24:13, he traveled to Emmaus with 2 of his disciples that day. They arrived in Emmaus, Luke 24:29, toward evening when the day was far spent. Then his disciples went back to Jerusalem where the other disciples were gathered. This was after evening had come. Jesus appeared in the room where they were. So now let's pick up the story in John 20:19. Then the same day at evening, being the first day of the week, when the doors were shut, the disciples were assembled for fear of the Jews. Then came Jesus and stood in the midst. I'm emphasizing the time of day change because it's critical to know the truth. This is the only harmonizing view I've seen for the 3 days and 3 nights. The only one. I've covered second Passover, the unfixed date of first fruit, sunrise Sabbaths, and New Testament commandments for keeping them. That should give you a lot to think about. This has been the Jesus Bomb. I'm out and the truth is in.